Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Warlords of Draenor raiding guide. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the flexible, which is normal and heroic mode versions, of Bracken Spore in the Highmaul raid. Now in order to complete this raid, you're going to want to bring at least 2 tanks and then a mixture of DPS and healers up to a maximum number of 30 players, as this is flexible mode. Now first of all, before you start this encounter, you're going to want to allocate 2 people who are going to be the designated quote-unquote bitches, as one of our raiders put it, for the entirety of this fight. And this is because before you do pull the boss, you will notice that there are 2 kind of little flamethrowers on the ground. And Siegeraf the Black Fuse is kind of coming back with the Black Fuse Company 9000, as these flamethrowers are made by the Black Fuse Company, and you will use them in order to defeat Brackenspore, to a certain extent. Now when you pick up one of these flamethrowers, you will gain an extra ability button, which causes you to pretty much fire out of your flamethrower, because you wouldn't fire anything else out of it, and this will cause you to set fire to what is called creeping moss, and we're going to talk about that creeping moss in a moment. Just as a side note as well, once you've used the flamethrower, you will then gain a short buff, which is called Burning Infusion, which will increase your critical strike, your multi-strike, and your haste chance. Now this effect stacks, and every 3 seconds an application of this will be removed from you. So you do kind of get the bitch roll, but at the same time you get a slight bonus from it. Now, as I mentioned, these flamethrowers are going to be used to deal with an ability called Creeping Moss, and this is kind of a... If you think back to Ragnaros Heroic in Firelands and the fire that was on the ground that people had to walk over, it's kind of like that, in the sense that the creeping moss will slowly begin to cover the area that you're fighting Brackenspore in, and people with the flamethrowers need to go and set the moss on fire. Now if you happen to stand in the creeping moss, it's going to inflict a small amount of nature damage to you every second, and also reduce your movement speed by 50%. It's also worth noting that if any of the fungal creatures are within the creeping moss, they're going to be healed for 2% of their lives every 2 seconds. Now, moving on to Bracken Spore, his first ability is called Rot, and this will cause him to inflict a small amount of nature damage every second, but this is a stacking debuff. This is obviously what you're going to be using for your tank switch in this fight, so we recommend switching on roughly 3 to 4 stacks of this, depending on how much damage you can actually take. His next ability is called Necrotic Breath, and this is going to cause him to inflict a high amount of nature damage every second to frontal enemies, so this is a frontal cone ability you're going to have to deal with. Necrotic Breath will also reduce any players that get hit by it, their healing taken, by 99%. So when he does cast this, you want to make sure you've only got 1 tank standing in front of the boss and not both of them, otherwise they're both going to be taking 99% reduced healing, and that's not going to be fun for anyone. And his next ability is called Infesting Spores, which is going to cause him to inflict a small amount of nature damage every second to all players in the raid. Now, this effect stacks up to 10 times, and it will last for 3 seconds on players. And when he reaches the 10th stack, he will then deal an additional burst of damage out to everyone in the raid. Now, healing through this can be quite painful, but thankfully you're going to have the joy of beneficial mushrooms spawning around the room. Now, these beneficial mushrooms have 2 different types, the first one being a living mushroom, and the second one being a rejuvenating mushroom. And just to add to your notes, the living mushroom is green, and the rejuvenating mushroom is blue. Now, with these mushrooms, what you need to do is heal them to full in order to gain the effects of their buffs. So, if you happen to heal the living mushroom to full, it will then cast an ability called Living Spores, which causes it to heal all units within 20 yards for 23,000 health every second. Now, what you need to be doing with this is when Infesting Spores goes off on the boss, that's when you want to tell your healers to heal up the living mushroom, and then players need to move to it so that they're there in time for the 8th, 9th and 10th stacks of Infesting Spores as a bare minimum. This will obviously take a lot of the pressure off the healers, as you're going to get free healing from the living spores. Now it's worth noting that these mushrooms will slowly die over time, and the rate at which they decay over time will increase, so you can't keep them around forever, unfortunately. Now the second mushroom is the Rejuvenating Mushroom, and once you've healed this to full, you will gain an ability called Rejuvenating Spores, which will increase the haste by 30% of anyone that is standing near it. It will also increase mana regeneration. So we never had trouble with 2 mushrooms up at one time, but depending on the abilities that are going off, so infesting spores is going off, you want to prioritize being near a living mushroom. Otherwise you want to be near a rejuvenating mushroom when it's been healed to full in order to get the haste bonus and the mana regeneration increase. Now unfortunately it's not all happy news, because there are also hostile fungus and mushrooms that you're going to also have to deal with. The first one is called a mind fungus, and this is a kind of bad looking mushroom that will spawn, and this will cause its ooze to seep into your veins, which doesn't sound very nice, and this will massively reduce your casting speed by 75%. It's also worth noting that these mushrooms will deal damage to people if they are standing near them. Now the next ones that are going to spawn aren't really mushrooms, they're more adds, and the first ones are called Spore Shooters, and these have only got one ability, which is called Spore Shot, and this will cause them to target a player and inflict a moderate amount of nature damage to them and anyone that is within 8 yards of that player. So when the Spore Shooters spawn, you want to kill them as fast as possible, because ideally you want your party or raid to be stacked up for as much AoE healing as you can get off. And the second type of ad that's going to spawn is called a Fungal Flesh-Eater, and this ad will spawn from the water that's at the side of the area where you're going to fight Bracken Spore, and a tank will need to pick this up as soon as it does spawn. Now when it comes to dealing with ads, you want to prioritize these over Bracken Spore, as you can deal with Bracken Spore with the buffs you get from the rejuvenating mushrooms. So when a Fungal Flesh-Eater spawns, kill it as fast as you can, and then when the Spore Shooters spawn, you want to kill them as fast as you can as well. It's worth noting you don't need to tank the Spore Shooters, they're just going to stand on the ground where they spawn. Now back to the big Fungal Flesh-Eater ad. This ad has got 2 abilities you're going to have to deal with. The first one being called Decay, and this is going to cause him to just simply inflict a very high amount of nature damage to everyone in the raid. Now, thankfully this ability is interruptible, and you want to be interrupting this every time it gets cast. There should be no cast of Decay going through at all. And his second ability is called Flesh-Eater, and this will cause him to consume the flesh of his enemy, so his tank, increasing his damage dealt by 10%, his attack speed by 10%, and his casting speed by 10%, and this is a stacking effect. You simply just need to kill the Fungal Flesh-Eater before this stacks too high and your tanks can't deal with the damage, and also making sure that you're aware that the cast of Decay will be shortened quite a bit as the Fungal Flesh-Eater is alive longer. Other than that, the fight is fairly straightforward. It's just a matter of killing off the ads as a priority, then killing Bracken Spore, making sure the area is not being covered completely in creeping moss, and then making sure you're standing near the correct mushrooms when they are alive. So that's going to do it for this Warlords of Draenor raiding guide. If you would like to be alerted to when we upload new raiding guides, then please do feel free to subscribe to the channel. And alternatively, if you'd like to view a written version of this guide, then please do head on over to flaskup.com or click on the link that's in the video description below. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.